The blood-red sunset painted the dusty streets of Tonopah Junction, Nevada, as Josephine Lawson fled through the shadows, her trembling fingers clutching a leather satchel close to her chest. The year was 1876, and the whispers about her had reached this remote corner of the territory before she had whispers that would destroy any chance of peace she might find here. The exhausted stagecoach that had delivered her to this mining settlement 6 hours ago now seemed like a distant memory. Josephine had hoped to disappear into the anonymity of the growing town, but that plan had shattered when she spotted Sheriff Wilson's deputy eyeing her suspiciously outside the general store. "They know," she whispered to herself, ducking into an alley between the saloon and the blacksmith's shop. Her heart pounded against her ribs like a trapped bird. 3 towns in 4 months, and still they hunted her. The sound of heavy boots on wooden planks sent her pressing deeper into the shadows. 2 men passed by, their voices carrying in the evening air. That Lawson woman, the one from Silver Creek, heard she arrived today. The doctor's wife thought she was locked up. Escaped, apparently. Poisoned her husband, they say. Doctor died slow and painful. Josephine bit her lip until she tasted blood. Lies. All lies. But who would believe her against the word of her husband's powerful family? As the voices faded, she crept toward the edge of town where she'd hidden her meager belongings earlier that day. She needed to move on, perhaps try California this time. But as she rounded the corner of the livery stable, she collided with a solid wall of muscle and leather. Strong hands steadied her before she could fall. "Whoa there, madam," a deep voice drawled. "You're in an awful hurry for this time of evening." Josephine looked up into the face of a man she didn't recognize, tall and broad-shouldered, with a weather-beaten face and eyes the color of a summer storm. Not local law, thank God. His clothes were dusty from the trail, and he wore his gun like a man accustomed to its weight. "Pardon me," she whispered, trying to sidestep him, but his gaze had sharpened, taking in her fine clothes, now travel-worn, and the fear in her eyes. "You in some kind of trouble, madam?" Before she could answer, shouts erupted from the main street. "Check behind the stables! The Lawson woman can't have gone far!" The stranger's eyebrow rose, but he didn't step aside. Instead, he pulled her deeper into the shadows. "Lawson, that would be you, I reckon." "Please," Josephine begged. "They'll hang me for something I didn't do." The man studied her for a long moment, then nodded toward a dapple-gray horse tethered nearby. "Name's Kieran Young. I've got a place about 10 miles out of town. You can hide there until morning, then be on your way." "Why would you help me?" Suspicion warred with desperation in her voice. Kieran's mouth quirked up at one corner. "Let's just say I've seen enough railroaded folks to know justice isn't always what the law deals out." He untied his horse with efficient movements. "Can you ride?" "Yes." "Then up you go. We've got to move fast." Josephine hesitated only a moment before allowing him to boost her onto his horse. As he swung up behind her, the shouts grew closer. "Hold tight," he murmured. And then they were galloping out of town, the cooling desert air rushing past them as darkness swallowed the horizon. They rode hard for nearly an hour, following trails that seemed invisible in the moonlight, but that Kieran navigated with confident ease. When they finally slowed to a walk, Josephine's entire body ached with tension and the strain of remaining upright. "Not much farther," Kieran said, his voice rumbling against her back. "They'll come looking," she replied. "I'm putting you in danger." "Let me worry about that. Sheriff Wilson and I have an understanding." "What kind of understanding?" "The kind where he knows I can outshoot him, and most of his deputies." There was no boast in his tone, just a simple statement of fact. As they crested a gentle rise, a small ranch came into view, a modest cabin with a sturdy barn and corral beside it. No lights shone in the windows. "You live alone?" Josephine asked as he helped her dismount, her legs nearly buckling beneath her. "Just me and the horses." Kieran led the way to the cabin door. "Been that way since my brother died at Vicksburg." Inside, the cabin was spare but clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and simple wooden furniture filled the main room. Kieran lit a lamp, illuminating a space that spoke of solitude, but not neglect. "You can take the bed," he said, gesturing to a doorway that presumably led to a bedroom. "I'll sleep out here." Josephine stood awkwardly in the center of the room, clutching her satchel. "Mr. Young, Kieran," he corrected, kneeling to start a fire in the hearth. "Kieran, I appreciate your help. But you should know what they're saying about me." His hands didn't pause in their work. "I figure you'll tell me if you want to." The kindness in his voice nearly undid her. For months, she'd been running, hiding, never trusting anyone. The weight of it all suddenly seemed too much to bear. "They say I poisoned my husband," she said, her voice barely audible above the crackling kindling. "That I murdered Dr. Edward Lawson in cold blood." Kieran stood, brushing his hands on his trousers. "And did you?" "No." Her chin lifted. "But I wished him dead every day for the last year of our marriage." To her surprise, Kieran nodded. "Wishing ain't doing. Coffee?" The abrupt change of subject startled her. Yes, please." As he set about brewing coffee, moving with efficient ease around his small kitchen area, Josephine slowly sank into a chair at the table. The normality of the moment, a man making coffee, the fire warming the room, made her dizzy with longing for a life she'd never truly had. "What will you do now?" Kieran asked, setting a steaming cup before her. "Keep running, I suppose, until I find somewhere they haven't heard of Josephine Lawson." "That's a hard road. Do I have a choice?" He considered her over the rim of his cup. "There's always a choice. Might not be a good one, but it's there. My choice is hang for a murder I didn't commit, or run until I can't anymore. Or fight." Josephine laughed bitterly. "Fight? Against Edward's family? They own half of Colorado territory. His father is a federal judge. Even the powerful have weak spots. You don't understand. Edward was—" She faltered, the words sticking in her throat. She'd never spoken them aloud to anyone. He was respected, admired, the brilliant young doctor with the charming smile. No one saw what he was behind closed doors. Kieran's eyes narrowed slightly. "The kind of man who leaves marks where clothes hide them?" Josephine's sharp intake of breath was answer enough. "I've known men like that," he said quietly. "Cowards dressed up as gentlemen." Tears burned in her eyes, but she blinked them back. Edward poisoned himself, in the end, an overdose of his own laudanum. He'd become addicted after an injury last year, but his family couldn't bear the scandal of a suicide, so they blamed me. Said I'd been slowly poisoning him for months. And no one questioned it? Who would? The respectable doctor's wife, whom he'd rescued from a life of poverty? Against the word of Judge Lawson? She took a shaky sip of coffee. "I tried to defend myself at first, but then I overheard the sheriff talking about a lynch mob, so I ran." Kieran was silent for a long moment, his weathered face thoughtful in the firelight. "Get some rest," he finally said. "Morning comes early around here." When Josephine awakened the next day, sunlight streamed through the cabin's small window, and the smell of bacon filled the air. She found Kieran at the stove, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal corded forearms. "Thought you might be hungry," he said without turning around. She was, desperately so. The simple breakfast he provided, bacon, biscuits, and strong coffee, was the first proper meal she'd had in days. "Thank you," she said when they'd finished eating, "for everything. I should be on my way now." "Where will you go?" The question hung between them, unanswerable. In truth, Josephine had no plan beyond escape. "I have some money saved," she said instead. "Enough to get to California, perhaps. And then—" She looked away. "I'll find work. I was a teacher before I married Edward. They'll look for you there, too. California's not as far as it once was. Then Oregon, or Washington Territory." Kieran leaned back in his chair. "Running's a hard life. Better than a hanging? What if there was another way?" Hope flickered dangerously in her chest. "What way?" "Edward's death was over 6 months ago, wasn't it?" When she nodded, he continued. "And in all that time, has anyone found actual evidence against you? They claim to have witnesses who saw me buying arsenic. Do they now? Interesting. Considering arsenic purchases have been strictly recorded since '71. He smiled slightly at her surprised look. "My father was a pharmacist. I know a thing or two about poisons." "What are you suggesting?" "That maybe the Lawson story has holes in it. Holes big enough to drive a wagon through, if someone knew where to look. For the first time in months, Josephine felt something other than fear, a dangerous spark of possibility. Even if that's true, who would help me? I'm alone in this. Kieran's storm gray eyes held hers steadily. Not anymore, you're not. Over the next several days, Josephine remained hidden at Kieran's ranch while he made discreet inquiries in town. To her surprise, he seemed well connected despite his solitary lifestyle. Most folks around here mind their own business, he explained one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the desert in gold and crimson. That's why I settled here after the war. No one asks too many questions about a man's past. Is your past so questionable? Josephine asked. A shadow crossed his face. Let's just say, I've done things I'm not proud of. War changes a man. You fought for the Union? Yes. Though sometimes I wonder if either side truly won. He glanced at her. What about you? How did a teacher end up married to a doctor from a powerful family? Josephine sighed, watching a hawk circle lazily overhead. Edward came to the mining town where I taught to help during a fever outbreak. He was different then, or perhaps I was just blind. He courted me like something from a fairy tale, and I thought I was fortunate beyond words when he proposed. When did it change? After we moved to Denver, his family made it clear I wasn't what they'd hoped for their son. Too common, too opinionated. Her fingers twisted in her skirt. Edward started drinking more, taking laudanum for headaches that seemed to grow more frequent. The first time he hit me was after a dinner party where I'd apparently embarrassed him by speaking about women's suffrage. Kieran's jaw tightened. No man has the right. That's not what the law says. A husband can correct his wife as he sees fit. The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. The law's been wrong before. They sat in companionable silence until the stars appeared, a brilliant tapestry above the desert. It struck Josephine that she hadn't felt this peaceful in years. Why are you helping me? She finally asked. You don't know me. I could be everything they say I am. Kieran studied her for a long moment. I knew from the moment I saw you running that you weren't a killer. I've seen killers during the war, after it. They don't have eyes like yours. What kind of eyes do I have? Honest ones, hurt, but not broken. His voice softened. And much too pretty to belong to someone wicked. The compliment brought color to her cheeks, and for the first time in months, Josephine felt like a woman rather than a fugitive. The next morning, Kieran rode into town alone, promising to return by nightfall with news. Josephine spent the day nervously pacing the cabin and tending to small chores, desperate for any distraction. When sunset came with no sign of him, fear clutched at her heart. What if he'd been arrested for harboring her? Or worse, what if he'd decided to turn her in for whatever reward the Lawsons might be offering? Just as she'd convinced herself of the worst, the sound of hoofbeats reached her ears. She rushed to the window to see Kieran dismounting, his expression grim. What's happened? She asked the moment he entered. He set his hat on the table with deliberate care. There's a telegram waiting for you at the telegraph office, from Judge Lawson himself. Josephine felt the blood drain from her face. How did he know I was here? He doesn't, not exactly. He sent these to every settlement within 300 miles. Kieran pulled a folded paper from his pocket. I convinced Hank at the office to let me see it. With trembling fingers, Josephine unfolded the telegram. To Mrs. Josephine Lawson, information received regarding your whereabouts. Surrender immediately to local authorities or consequences will be severe. Evidence mounting, trial date, set. Judge Thornton Lawson. They're bluffing, Kieran said, watching her face carefully. Trying to smoke you out. How can you be sure? Because I spoke with an old friend today. He works for the Territorial Marshal's office now. Says there's been no official warrant issued for your arrest, just a lot of noise from a powerful family trying to avoid scandal. Josephine sank into a chair, the telegram crumpling in her fist. Then why am I still running? Why hasn't anyone stood up and said this is wrong? Because men like Judge Lawson make sure the truth stays buried. Kieran poured them both a measure of whiskey, the amber liquid catching the lamplight. But I found something interesting. Seems the good doctor was treating a certain Miss Eleanor Burke for nervous exhaustion before his death. Eleanor? She was barely 20, the daughter of one of his colleagues. Josephine's eyes widened with sudden understanding. He was with her? Kieran nodded grimly. And according to my friend, she was in a delicate condition when she was suddenly sent to relatives in Boston, right around the time Edward died. The implication struck Josephine like a physical blow. He got her with child, and then killed himself rather than face the consequences, leaving you as the perfect scapegoat. Josephine drained her whiskey in one burning swallow. It doesn't matter. It's still my word against the Lawsons. Not quite. Kieran leaned forward, his eyes intense. Eleanor's back in Denver now. And word is, she's not happy with how things were handled. Hope and fear warred in Josephine's chest. You think she would speak for me? I think she might, with the right persuasion. And I think Judge Lawson knows it too, which is why he's suddenly so desperate to find you. I can't go back to Denver. They'll hang me before I can say a word in my defense. Kieran's hand covered hers, warm and calloused. Not if you have someone fighting beside you. Their eyes met across the table, and something unspoken passed between them, a promise, a possibility. Why would you do this? She whispered. Risk everything for a woman you barely know? Because I've spent 10 years trying to forget the things I saw in the war, the injustice, the senseless cruelty. His grip tightened on her hand. Maybe helping you is how I finally make peace with all that. Josephine turned her palm up to lace her fingers with his. I'm afraid. I know, he said softly, but you're not alone anymore. That night, as Josephine lay in Kieran's bed, he still insisted on sleeping in the main room. She found herself imagining a future where she wasn't running a future perhaps, with this quiet, principled man who had offered her shelter when no one else would. It was a dangerous dream, but for the first time in months, it didn't seem entirely impossible. In the morning, they formulated a plan. Kieran would travel to Denver to speak with Eleanor Burke, while Josephine remained hidden at the ranch. It was risky, but as Kieran pointed out, he wasn't a wanted fugitive. How will you convince her to help? Josephine asked, as she helped him pack for the journey. People usually want to do the right thing, he replied. Sometimes they just need someone to show them the way. The day of his departure dawned clear and bright, the Nevada desert stretching endlessly under a turquoise sky. Josephine walked him to where his horse waited, saddled and ready. Be careful, she said, suddenly reluctant to let him go. Kieran tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch lingering. I'll be back within 2 weeks. If I'm not... He hesitated. There's money in the jar on the top shelf in the pantry, enough to get you to California. Don't say that. Just being practical. His eyes softened. But I intend to come back. Make no mistake. Something in his gaze made her breath catch. Before she could think better of it, Josephine rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was brief, but in it was all the gratitude and hope she couldn't express in words. When she pulled back, Kieran looked momentarily stunned, before a slow smile spread across his face. Now, that's something worth hurrying back for. The days of his absence stretched interminably. Josephine kept herself busy tending to the small garden behind the cabin and caring for the horses. Each sunset that arrived without Kieran's return added to her anxiety, but she forced herself to remain hopeful. On the 12th day, as she was hanging laundry in the yard, the sound of approaching horses froze her in place. Not one rider, but several. Her first instinct was to run, but where? The desert offered no cover for miles. Instead, she ducked into the cabin and retrieved the rifle Kieran had shown her how to use. With trembling hands, she positioned herself by the window. 3 riders approached, but to her immense relief. One of them was Kieran. The others, a man and a woman, were strangers to her. Setting the rifle aside, Josephine stepped onto the porch just as they dismounted. Kieran's face broke into a wide smile at the sight of her. Josephine, he called, leading the visitors toward the cabin. I've brought friends. The woman was young, barely 21, with delicate features and expensive clothing that looked out of place in the rugged surroundings. The man beside her was older, distinguished-looking, with silver at his temples and a stern expression. Mrs. Lawson, the young woman said, stepping forward with nervous determination. My name is Eleanor Burke. I believe you know who I am. Josephine nodded, unable to speak. And this is Mr. Philip Montgomery from the Denver Tribune, Kieran added. They've both come a long way to hear your story. Over coffee at Kieran's table, the full picture emerged. Eleanor, guilt-ridden and mistreated by the Lawsons after Edward's death, had been searching for a way to clear her conscience. When Kieran arrived with his questions, she'd seized the opportunity to tell the truth. Edward was not the man everyone thought he was, she said softly, her hands cradling her coffee cup. After I discovered I was with child, he became cruel. Said no one would believe me if I named him as the father. When I threatened to tell my parents anyway, she faltered. He struck you, Josephine finished, familiar with the pattern. Eleanor nodded. The night he died, he'd been drinking heavily. He came to my parents' house while they were away, demanding I drink something he'd brought, said it would solve our problem. When I refused, he became enraged. He left, and the next morning, they found him dead. Mr. Montgomery, who had been taking notes, looked up sharply. And Judge Lawson knew all this? He suspected at least, Eleanor replied. He sent me away immediately, arranged for a doctor in Boston to take care of my condition. When I returned, I was to say nothing of what had happened. But now you're willing to speak publicly? Josephine asked incredulously. Eleanor lifted her chin. Yes. Your Mr. Young convinced me that silence only protects the guilty. The phrase, your Mr. Young, sent a flush of warmth through Josephine. But she focused on the matter at hand. What happens now? Mr. Montgomery cleared his throat. I intend to publish Miss Burke's account, along with evidence I've gathered regarding inconsistencies in the case against you. The Tribune has considerable influence, Mrs. Lawson. Once the story breaks, Judge Lawson will find it difficult to maintain his vendetta. He'll try to discredit you both, Josephine warned. Let him try, Eleanor said, with surprising steel in her voice. I have letters from Edward that prove our relationship, and I'm no longer afraid of the Lawsons. That evening, after their visitors had been settled in the spare room that Kieran hastily prepared, Josephine and Kieran sat alone on the porch, watching the stars emerge. You did it, she said wonderingly. You actually found a way. We're not out of the woods yet, he cautioned. Judge Lawson won't give up easily. But for the first time, I have hope. She turned to face him in the gathering darkness. How can I ever repay you? Kieran reached for her hand, his touch gentle. You don't owe me anything, Josephine. That's not true. You risked everything for me. Maybe I had my own reasons. Such as? He was silent for a long moment, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. From the moment I saw you in that alley, something changed. I've been alone a long time by choice, mostly. Never met anyone who made me want to change that. Until you. Josephine's heart quickened. Kieran, I know the timing is all wrong. You're still legally married to a dead man, with his family trying to hang you for his death. A wry smile crossed his face. Not exactly the stuff of fairy tales. I think we're both past believing in fairy tales, she said softly. Maybe, but I believe in second chances. He met her eyes. When this is over, when you're truly free, I'd like you to consider staying, not out of gratitude or obligation, but because you want to. Instead of answering, Josephine leaned forward and kissed him again, longer this time, with all the emotion that had been building between them. When they finally parted, both breathing heavily, she rested her forehead against his. I've spent my whole life following other people's paths, she whispered. My father's, then Edward's. For the first time, I want to choose my own way. And that way leads here, to you. The journey to justice proved neither quick nor easy. The Tribune's explosive story about Dr. Edward Lawson's suicide and his family's cover-up sparked a firestorm of controversy throughout the territory. Judge Lawson predictably fought back, using his considerable influence to discredit both Eleanor and the newspaper. But the tide of public opinion, once turned, proved impossible to stem. Other women came forward with stories of Edward's inappropriate behavior. A former housemaid from the Lawson household testified that she had seen the doctor preparing his own laudanum mixture the night of his death, far stronger than his usual dose. Through it all, Kieran remained steadfastly at Josephine's side. When they traveled to Denver for the formal inquiry into Edward's death, He faced down threats from Lawson's supporters with the same quiet courage he'd shown since the beginning. 3 months after Eleanor's revelation, a territorial judge officially ruled Edward Lawson's death a suicide and cleared Josephine of all suspicion in the matter. Judge Thornton Lawson, facing a scandal that threatened to destroy his career, resigned his position and retreated to his family's estate in the east. "It's over," Kieran said as they stood on the steps of the Denver courthouse after the ruling. "You're free." Josephine took a deep breath of the crisp autumn air, scarcely believing it could be true. "What happens now?" "That depends." He took her hand. "The ranch is a far cry from Denver. Might seem awful quiet after all this excitement." "Quiet sounds perfect," she smiled up at him. "Besides, I was thinking the town of Tonopah Junction might need a school teacher. I heard the miners there are starting to bring their families west." Kieran's eyes lit with hope. "You mean it? You'll stay?" "Wild horses couldn't drag me away." She squeezed his hand. "But there's something I need to do first." Before leaving Denver, Josephine visited Edward's grave, not out of loyalty or love, but to finally close that chapter of her life. As she stood before the imposing headstone, she felt no anger, no bitterness, only a profound sense of release. "I forgive you," she whispered to the cold marble, "not for your sake, but for mine." With those words, she turned her back on the past and walked toward her future. The following spring, as wildflowers painted the Nevada desert in brilliant colors, Josephine Lawson became Josephine Young in a simple ceremony attended by the handful of friends they'd made in Tonopah Junction. Eleanor Burke, now working as a nurse in San Francisco, traveled to witness the union. "You look happy," Eleanor told Josephine as they embraced after the ceremony. "Truly happy." "I am," Josephine replied, glancing toward Kieran, who was accepting congratulations from the town sheriff, the same man who had once searched for her as a fugitive. "For the first time in my life." As the small celebration continued around them, Kieran found his way to Josephine's side. "Mrs. Young," he said, the name still new and wonderful on his tongue. "Mr. Young," she returned with a smile. "Any regrets?" he asked, his arm slipping around her waist. Josephine leaned into his embrace. Watching their friends and neighbors against the backdrop of the sunset-painted desert, the little school where she now taught stood at the edge of town, and beyond it, the ranch that had become her sanctuary and home. "None," she said, and meant it with all her heart. Later that night, as they lay tangled in each other's arms in the bedroom of the cabin, their cabin now, Josephine traced the outline of Kieran's face in the moonlight. "Do you remember what I said to you that first night?" she asked softly. "When you asked why they were hunting me?" "You said they called you poison," he replied, catching her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "And you said," "I said, then let me be the cure." Kieran pulled her closer. "Little did I know you'd be mine as well." In the years that followed, their family grew first with a son they named James, then twin daughters who inherited their mother's determination and their father's steady strength. Josephine's school flourished as the town expanded, and Kieran's ranch prospered. The rumors that had once threatened to destroy her faded into distant memory, replaced by the respect she earned as a teacher and the love she found in her new life. Sometimes, when new settlers arrived in Tonopah Junction, they would hear whispers of the schoolteacher's dramatic past, how she had been falsely accused, how the quiet rancher she married had fought for justice when no one else would. But to those who truly knew them, Kieran and Josephine Young were simply two souls who had found in each other not just love, but redemption, the poison and the cure, healing each other with every passing day in the heart of the wild Nevada desert.